Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another panel. And please welcome back to the channel Todd Evans, Davey Cretan, John the Music Nut, and Tom Curlis. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for this one.
Looking
Thank you
forward
for
to
For
it.
inviting
having
me.
us all.
And
Absolutely.
today, and today we're going to be talking about artists who, in our opinion, never topped their debut album. This was an interesting topic to sort of wrap our heads around because, you know, these are not necessarily artists where we think they did one good album and then the rest was rubbish. I know in my case, a lot of these artists, I really love a lot of their other albums. It's just that that debut album was just something so, so special that they never quite managed to recapture. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around. We've picked three each, and we'll have some honorable mentions at the end as well. But we've picked three main choices each, and what I'll do is I'll go around the way I see it on my screen and ask for one example each, and we'll go one, 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 and then we'll have honorable mentions as a quick fire round at the end. So we'll start off with Todd. Todd, what is your first choice for artists that never topped their debut album?
Okay, well, I'm very enthusiastic about this topic, but I had a little bit of trouble with it because I hardly ever think that somebody's first album is their best album. But I do have some that I feel strongly about, and this one I probably feel the most strongly about. This is Rattlesnakes by Lloyd Cole and the Commotions. Now,
Mm.
I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, but this album came out in 1984. And the album Rattlesnakes is a really just a fantastic production. It's got a lot of jangly guitars and intricate, acoustic guitar arrangements, string arrangements by Ann Dudley, who became, who was already famous by that point for doing Lux Kind of Love and a whole bunch of other things. And the album is just there's something about it. The arrangements are super clever, and there's one song on it called "Forest Fire," which is I'm going to tell this is your going to be everyone's homework. If you've never heard "Forest Fire" by Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, listen to that when you get a chance. It's got one of the best guitar solos that you'll ever hear. Just this really atmospheric solo, and it's got this second part that goes under it, which kind of sounds kind of like Frippertronics. Very cool. I don't know how these guys were so good right out of the gate. This album was produced by a guy named Paul Hardiman, who hasn't produced a whole lot of things. He produced a couple of albums by Chris de Burgh, and he also produced Soul Mining by The. And very interesting production. And so what happens after this album is that the label, which in their UK label was Polydor, rushed them into the studio too fast. And the album that comes after that is called Easy Pieces, which is pretty good. They intended to use Paul Hardiman as producer again, and the label didn't like what was happening at the sessions, so they fired him, and they assigned Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley to their second album. And Langer and Winstanley are great producers. I like just about everything that they've produced. They're famous for producing Madness, and my favorite thing that they produced is Punch the Clock by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. But one of the things that happened is they got very involved in telling these guys what to do, which their original producer Paul Hardiman did not do. And so one of the things that happened is that Clive Langer wanted Lloyd Cole to control his vibrato on his voice, which is something that he never really gave any thought. And so Lloyd Cole became self-conscious about his voice and underconfident. And and then their third album, Mainstream, is was produced by the guy from Ian Stanley from Tears for Fears. And all three of these albums are really good, but none of them quite have the really uniquely creative arrangements that Rattlesnakes does. It's just a piece of perfect mid 80s pop music, and it's almost timeless when you listen to it today. And the his Lloyd Cole's career kind of goes like this. He doesn't have any bad albums. He doesn't have any more great albums as good as this one. But this band, Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, actually split up after their third album. And Lloyd Cole moved to New York and started working with different people. So that's my first choice, Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, Rattlesnakes.
Yeah, no, really good choice. That album, actually, that first album, Rattlesnakes, was reasonably big here. I remember hearing the title track quite a lot on the radio and that sort of thing. So it was the title track that was the big song on that, wasn't it? Or was there another
I
one
think
that was
so.
quite
Yeah.
big?
Yeah. I think so. That and but yeah, it did different. It was successful in different levels in different countries. So
Yeah,
definitely more successful in the UK than in the States.
yeah, yeah.
And he
No,
was
it's a
always a cult artist here.
Yeah, yeah. Very interesting a trajectory of his career. He in the early not late 90s and early 2000s, he decided that he needed to make age appropriate music. So his music became more refined and less rock and more sophisticated. And then about 10 years ago, he just said, you know what, that was a really dumb idea. And so he started making more rock records. And so very interesting to follow him through that timeline.
yeah. No, great choice, Todd. Love it. Davey, what is your first choice?
My first choice, I'm going to start off in the Pacific Northwest, but not in the 1990s. This is a band that originated in the Pacific Northwest, but because in the early 70s, because of the draft in America, they migrated north to Canada and they got their first record label deal with a Canadian record label called Mushroom Records. And I think you see where I'm going, and this might be a tad controversial. In September 75, the record was released in Canada. It did not come out in America until February 14th, Valentine's Day in the States. That's a big hint. It's the first album by the band Heart, the Wilson sisters, Roger Fisher, Howard Lee, Steve Fossen on bass, and the great Mike DeRosa on drums, although he only plays on 2 tracks on the debut, oddly enough. But I think that this is the best Heart album. It's the first one that came out. It's got the 2 big hits, Magic Man and Crazy on You, of course. I don't think there's a bad track on the record, though. And it goes from hard rock to soft folky rock, but that's the way the Wilson sisters always played it. In the land of Bicycle Legs in Australia, it went to number 9. It was a gold album. In Canada, it went to number 20, double platinum. In the UK, number 36. And here in America, number 7, a platinum album. And I love this record. And when I worked in the record stores, I always had battles with my coworkers. 2 of them, Josh and Joe, said Little Queen is the best Heart album. And I would always say it's Dreamboat Annie. And we used to battle, and I used to put on Dreamboat Annie, and they would battle me and always play Little Queen. So these were probably the Heart records that we played the most during my years at a certain record store in the 90s and 2000s. There were some really good deep tracks here. And my 2 favorites would probably be Soul of the Sea, which is 6.5 minutes, and Sing Child, which is a 5-minute, like, hard rock song. And to me, the thing that makes this album, besides Ann's voice, of course, that should go without saying, Roger Fisher's lead guitar work on this album. And that guy was a monster, and it's a real shame that he was kicked out of the band after the 3rd album, before they did their 4th album, or 5th, depending which way you look at it, Baby Lestrange. In 79, they threw him out of the band, sadly. But that guy is such a monster player, and he's done so little since then. Some of you might remember that in, I think it was 1990, he was on a band called Alias, which was 2/5 of the Canadian band Sheriff. John knows it. And the 3 classic guys from Heart, Roger Fisher on guitar, Steve Fossen on bass, and Mike DeRosa on drums, who's a big Bonham fan. And that guy hits so powerfully. He's a great drummer, very underrated. So that's my first choice. It might be controversial because a lot of people might pick Little Queen, Dog and Butterfly, even the 80s records. the self-titled debut from '85, which had 4 top 20 singles in the States. I like that album. I like Brigade, Desire Walks On. I really like this stuff from the debut to, I think, 1993, Desire Walks On. They've made some good albums since then. And eventually I will do a ranking on my channel. But that is my first choice, the debut album from Heart called Dreamboat Annie.
Wonderful. Great choice. Now, just
Thanks.
quickly, for my Australian viewers, um, those early Heart records were on Mushroom Records, but that's not the Australian Mushroom Records. That's actually a Canadian label. So it's
Correct.
a different label. I think when it came out here, it was on, I think, a label called Interfusion or something like that. Those early Heart records.
I never
So
heard of that label. Wow.
yeah, no, it's an Australian only label. So yeah.
Interesting.
No, no, really good choice. Love it.
Thanks.
Okay, John, what have you got for us for your first album that never, artist that never topped the debut album?
Hey, thank you all for having me here today. Now, this is an artist I've talked about on my channel, the Music Nut program. Their second live performance was at the original Woodstock in 1969, and they are a supergroup. Now, if I say this, you already know what I'm talking about. And they were a trio, and it's Crosby, Stills, and Nash, their self-titled debut. And it is my want. Here's the cassette that I bought when I was about 18 years old or so. A lot of
Nice.
people might think Deja Vu was the best album when Neil Young joined the band, but I always thought that this album was the most consistent. I thought this was top notch from beginning to end. You had Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, which was a top 20 single. It was the second single off the album. And their performance of this at Woodstock is one of the highlights of the festival. And Marrakesh Express, which is the next track, is actually the first single off the album. And that hit number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100. But you got a lot of other great songs on here. And it all depends on who's singing, what the mood of the song is. If you want something more ethereal, you got David Crosby with Guinevere and Long Time Gone. If you want something that's more mellow, you got Lady of the Island or 49 Bye-Byes by Graham Nash. And then if you wanted songs that were a little more, they were more based on harmonies, and Stephen Stills was often writing the lyrics to this, you had Helplessly Hoping and You Don't Have to Cry, Three Road Downs. So there was a lot of variety on this album. I don't think they ever touched this one. This one hit number 4 in the United States on the Billboard Top 200. And they had a spotty career in the fact that they made the Deja Vu album with Neil Young, then they toured for a while, then they broke up, then they got back together with Young, then they broke up again with David Crosby, went to prison, then they got back together with Young again, then they went out without Young again. So they don't have a lot of albums for how long they've been around, but the first album I thought was undoubtedly their peak, and that would be my first choice.
No, it's a good choice too. I mean, it really is a toss up between that one and Deja Vu, isn't it? And
Yes.
I know that our colleague, I'm sure we've all worked with him, Davey Gallagher, he actually argues that Crosby, Stills and Nash and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young are two different bands.
That's what
So,
I was going to say. They're two different bands, right? Exactly.
so you know,
I think they're a little
you could
different
have
too.
chosen either of them in that respect. So,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I also had that in my pile, by the way. Good
yeah.
call.
All right. Tom, what is your first choice for this topic?
Okay, well, in 1983, I was 14 years old and I heard this song come over the radio and I was just spellbound because I was a drummer and I loved drums and I loved the sound of big drums. And this song kicks into do do da do do sha. And I was like, "Oh, this is right up my alley." So I had to go with Big Country. Um, this album just always had a special place in my heart. Yes, yes, there we go. Yeah, The Crossing is just so good. It's so amazing from beginning to end, from that big single in a big country. But the whole record for me is fantastic. And I love the rhythm section of Mark Brzezinski and Tony Butler, who also played with Pete Townsend, who at that time I was also a huge fan of Pete Townsend. And they're in the Slit Skirts video, if you watch the Slit Skirts video. Um, but you know, the leader of this band came from the band Skids, Stuart Adamson, and he this was the beginning of a new band for him. And I just think there's just so much kinetic energy on this, and just the songs are just unrelenting. The choruses are huge. The production from Steve Lillywhite is fantastic. It's a very 80s production, but I love it. It's a 80s in a great way. And songs like Inwards, I just everything Inwards, but everything's loose. Chance, A Thousand Stars. I mean, this album is just unrelenting. It never ends. The Storm, I love. Poro Man, I love. Ends with that Poro Man. I saw them live, and they did some of these songs live, and they were just fantastic. Even when I think it was like from 1990s when I saw them, but it's still these songs still resonated. So I just love this debut. I don't think I did like Steel Town. I did like The Seer. I did like Peace in Our Time, but they never topped the debut, in my opinion. So
Yeah. Well, as you saw, I agree with you 100%. It was one of my honorable mentions. So, um, it is a terrific album. I remember seeing them perform in a big country on the Grammys in what would have been, what, 84 or 85 or whenever it was. Because I think they were nominated for Best New Artist. So,
yes.
um, yeah, no, wonderful, wonderful record. And I agree, those follow-up records are really good too, but just not quite up to the quality of that first record. So, yeah, great, great choice. Love it. Okay, my first choice, we're going to be right at the beginning of the 80s. We're going to be talking about a post-punk band. Not a big selling band, but highly, highly influential. And as much as I love the rest of their catalog, I never think they topped this debut album. And that the band I'm talking about is Gang of Four, and the album is Entertainment. What a record this is. I mean, just I know here in Australia, this is a big influence on one of Australia's sort of favorite pub rock bands, which was Hunters and Collectors. They had a real that it had that Gang of Four vibe to their early stuff. They were influential on a bunch of other English musicians too, but you know, you got wonderful songs on this album, Ether, Natural's not in it. Not Great Men. I love that song. Such a good song. Damaged Goods. You've got Essence and Glass. At Home, He's a Tourist. And, this is a highly, highly political album, as a lot of their stuff would be. Very leftist politics that a lot of that sort of post-punk had too. We were talking about the before, Todd Evans was meant, definitely an influence on I think, Gang of Four. So yeah, just a wonderful, wonderful record. The Solid Gold after this almost gets there. Almost. It's like, yeah, if this is an A plus, Solid Gold is an A, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The records after that are good, sometimes very good, but they started to lose a little bit of that edge. They went from sort of live drums to programmed drums, and they started losing members here and there, and that sort of thing. But this album, yeah, I mean, it's just an absolute classic of post-punk. If you've never heard this record, go and do yourself a favor. Go to your listening app of choice and play this record, because I don't think if you're into that sort of post-punk sound, you won't be disappointed with this record at all.
Yeah.
Great choice.
Great
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
All right, Todd, what is your second choice?
Okay. Well, this one was tough because this is a band that I really love. I've talked about them a lot. On Grant's Rock Warehouse, we did a whole series where we took the albums, We did deep dives into the albums from the beginning to the end, or almost to the end. But I can't, as much as I like some of their later albums, I can't deny that this is the best album by the band ABC. Uh, just a perfect storm of the just the right amount, the right number of people together. Produced by Trevor Horn, recorded at, I want to say, let me see, it was recorded at Sarm East in London, which was basically in the basement of like a hair salon or something like that, and just super creative, a band that was really pretty much brand new. They started out as an avant-garde band called Vice Versa that was barely even a rock band. And by the time they became ABC, they just got really, really good, really fast. And to be in the studio with Trevor Horn was just an amazing thing. Engineered by Gary Langan, who became a very famous and world-renowned engineer. And I talk a lot about this band, this album, the follow-up to it, which is a really spectacular album, very much more guitar oriented and really a rock album. But and so I love this album. I think it's underrated. And the two after that, uh, How to Be a Zillionaire comes after that, and it's very electronic, uh, all electronic drums, all programmed and stuff like that. And then they do this Alphabet City, and it's trying to be more like this. They kind of go, okay, well, we're done experimenting. Let's go back to the well and do something a lot like Let's Kind of Love, and it's good, but not as good as Let's Kind of Love. They even in the past 4 or 5 years did a Lexicon of Love too, and it is also very good, very much in the same vein as this, but not as good still. So I have to give it to the Lexicon of Love as the best ABC album in a group of very good albums. That one's still the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about in America or in the UK. I don't really know their sort of history in the charts and that sort of thing. But here, that album and The Look of Love and Poison Arrow pretty much is, after that, they kind of dropped off the map here.
Yeah, in the States they did a little better. Their third album had a big hit in the States called with a song called Be Near Me. And then I believe on Alphabet City, When Smokey Sings, I think got to number 5, which is actually higher than The Look of Love got. And then
Yeah,
that was it for the
yeah.
States.
Now you mention it, when Smokey Sings did do something here, it definitely got played on the radio and stuff. I'm not sure what its chart position was in Australia, um, but I remember hearing it on the radio at the time and that sort of thing. But it really was that first album that was huge here. So
Yeah, in fact, I was just looking up When Smokey Sings, and Australia got to number 25, so pretty
yeah,
respectable. Yeah,
yeah. All right, no, excellent choice. I love that album to death. So yeah.
but they're all
All
good.
right. Yeah, yeah. All right, Davey, what's your second artist that never topped their debut album?
Okay, I'm going a little off the rails here. Totally different genre. The 1980s. This band started in about 1982, highly influential on the big four of thrash. That is Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax. They also influenced The Offspring and NoFX. Their songs have been covered by Limp Bizkit, Cypress Hill, Body Count, Slayer, and Senses Fail. Sorry, they I guess they have songs that have a political bent, going back to what was said earlier, and a lot about angry, disaffected youth and a lot of teen angst, because the main song they're known for was written when the singer lyricist was still a teenager. The record clocks in at 28 minutes long. Of course, I'm talking released on July 5th, 1983, the debut album from Suicidal Tendencies, hardcore punk crossover thrash. And everyone knows Institutionalized with that great line, all I wanted was a Pepsi. and that's been quoted in songs too. And it's Mike Muir on vocals and lyrics, the great underrated Grant Estes on guitars, Luigi Mayorga on bass and backing vocals. And you hear his bass on the record, which I always love. Just like my first choice, you could hear the bass on that first Hard album. And on drums, Amory Smith. So it's the original, the debut record from '83. The second album didn't come out till 4 years later in 1987. It was also a punk album, but after that, they transitioned into a metal band. And I like their metal stuff. We used to play it at the record stores I worked at. But something about this debut album, it's the anger, it's the angst, it's the political bent of it. And of course, later on, Mike Muir almost got into a fist fight with Dave Mustaine from Megadeth backstage at a festival because of their differing political beliefs. And crazy history to this band. They're still around today. They've never broken up. They've gone through a lot of members, but they got some great songs on this first album. Two-Sided Politics, I Shot the Devil, which is very political. I won't go into the details of it. Subliminal, Won't Fall in Love Today, and Memories of Tomorrow clock in under a minute each. Institutionalized was the big hit. And people also know I Saw Your Mommy, which is almost 5 minutes long, which for them is an epic song. So 28 minutes long, the debut from '83, Suicidal Tendencies is my second choice.
Nice. We're getting a nice variety of music on this show, aren't we? And I always love it when we do these panels because we tend to go all over the musical map. So
Yep.
thanks for bringing that one, Davey. It's yeah, that's a really good album.
Absolutely.
All right, John, what is your second choice?
All right. To me, this is an album that almost plays like a greatest hits album. And I don't think they ever came close to touching this album again. We talk about those albums that play like greatest hits albums, like the debut by Boston and the debut by the Cars. But we don't talk much about the debut by Bad Company. And there's 8 tracks on here, and 6 of these got played heavy on album-oriented rock radio for decades. Now, the singles were Can't Get Enough, which was a top 5 hit, and Moving On was another single. I believe it charted in the top 25. But Ready for Love is timeless. It's been played heavy. The title song has been covered by other artists. That might be their most famous song, even though they had a lot of hit singles. Rock Steady got played very heavy on AOR. Seagull, great acoustic ballad that Paul Rodgers does. Another excellent track on here. And even the songs that didn't get played, Don't Let Me Down, The Way I Choose, are also really strong. I think after this, they made a few very good albums and a lot of decent albums that had great singles. And that includes the Brian Howe albums as well. Like the albums were okay, but the singles were great. But here, they got it right on the first shot. Self-titled debut from Bad Company in 1974. And this was also a super group too, because you had Mick Ralphs from Mott the Hoople, you had Paul Rodgers from Free, you had Boz Burrell from King Crimson, and you had Simon Kirke, who was in Free as well. So another super group here in my listings, but fantastic debut album from Bad Company. That's my second choice.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
good one. You know, the funny thing about Boz Burrell is he became best known as the bass player in Bad Company.
Right.
When he first joined King Crimson, he didn't even play bass. He
Hmm.
was hired as their singer, and then their bass player bailed on them at the last minute. And so Robert Fripp decided, let's teach Boz how to play bass. And so he and Ian Wallace, King Crimson's drummer at the time, basically talked Boz through how to be a bass player. And then after that, he joined, Bad Company, and he wasn't a singer anymore. He was a bass player. So I've always found that little story fascinating about Boz.
Definitely.
So, Okay, thanks for that, John. Tom, what is your second choice for artists that never topped their debut album?
Okay, well this one might be a bit of a hot take. Possibly this artist has been around a very long time. One of those artists that's very restless and does all sorts of different types of music. Very talented musician. And there's no question he's done, and it's hard because he's done so much. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't think, I think there's better albums than the debut. But when it comes down for my taste, I always come back to the debut. And that is Look Sharp. Um, I just love this album so much, and I just think it's just such a I don't know, just so this is a band. I mean, this is and we always talk about Graham Maybe bass playing on this is just out of this world. And we just, whenever we talk about bass, whenever we're doing a bass track for one of my projects or whatever, it's like, hey, could you try to get that Graham Maybe sound? It's like, yeah, right. You wish, you know. And this was just, Gary Sanford on guitar, Dave Houghton, I think is how you say it, on drums. And really Joe would get in the front, and he would just front the band. He would just sing. And it was post punk, loud and fast, but still very melodic songs. I mean, One More Time, I just love that. And just, it's such a great opening song. Sunday Papers, I love. Is She Really, of course, the big hit, Is She Really Going Out with Him? Um, then he's got things like Got the Time, which ends the album, which is like almost like punkish, very fast. And I think a band, I want to say Anthrax maybe covered
Yeah,
that. Is that
yeah,
right?
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, for to me, that's just obviously there's a lot of musicians that are just perking their ears up with this record, and I just always come back to this. I love Night and Day. I do like the second. I like I'm the Man quite a bit. I like Beat Crazy. I like a lot of Joe Jackson, but I always come back to the debut. It's just so, in my opinion, it's my favorite. So
yeah. Well, Joe
Yeah,
Jackson's one of my favorite artists of all time. So picking a
yeah,
favorite for me would be nigh on impossible, I think. But that original Joe Jackson band, so good. I mean, they might have been one of the first bands I think I ever heard that had a rhythm guitarist and a lead bass player,
yes, exactly.
you
Good
know.
way of looking at it.
Um, and I mean, Graham maybe to this day is still working with Joe Jackson too, which I think is incredible. He also did briefly do a stint with They Might Be Giants, another one of my favorite bands of all
mhm.
time. So yeah, one of the great bass players. But Joe Jackson, I mean, what a talent, you know. His most
Yeah, and
recent record is him pretending to be a 19th century music hall act. And
Right.
he's just gone all over the musical map, Joe Jackson. He's done, this post-punk new wave kind of stuff. You know, he's done the wonderful Jump and Jive album
Up and jive. Yes.
where he does all the
Yes.
big band covers. He's done jazz, he's done, progressive music, he's done just about everything, you know.
Classical.
So, classical,
yeah,
Yes.
indeed.
yeah. And when he
So,
reunited that band from the Look Sharp album in 2002 or 2003,
yeah,
I think, it was like they had not lost anything. It was like no time had gone by. They were
That's a
still
great
so
album.
Good
good.
album.
Yeah.
Yes.
Volume
yeah,
Yes.
4, a very good album. Yes.
absolutely. No, wonderful choice, Tom. Thanks for that. Now, my second choice might be a little controversial in as much as what technically counts as a debut. But I reckon this is this artist's debut album because he was in an incredibly famous band in the 60s. And then towards the end of the 60s, he started doing some collaboration albums with his significant other. But then this is his first album under his own name, and I still think it's the best album he did under his own name. I am talking about John Lennon Plastic Ono Band. This is the first album that John Lennon did on his own. He did the Two Virgins and Life with the Lions and stuff, but those were collaboration albums with Yoko. They weren't proper solo albums. This was his first proper solo album, and I don't think he ever did a better album than this one. It's raw, it's stripped back. And even, I mean, people go on about the Primal Scream stuff on this album, and yes, there is some of that. But even there's a lot of slower songs too, ballads, tender songs, but they're still stripped back. Just about every song on this album is simply guitar bass drums or piano bass drums. There's next to no overdubbing on this album. You've just got John Lennon either playing guitar or playing piano. You've got Ringo on drums and playing some of his best drums ever, I think. And then you've got the wonderful Klaus Voormann on bass. You've got a couple of tracks where Billy Preston comes in and plays some additional piano and that sort of thing. But I mean, the songs on this album too. Mother, I Found Out, Working Class Hero, God, you know, these are all really sort of classic John Lennon songs that, this album didn't do as well as some of his later ones would. This didn't sell as much as Imagine did, and it didn't sell as much as Walls and Bridges did. It didn't have a hit single off it like Mind Games. But to me, it's the rawest, most honest work that John ever did. And yeah, that it's still my favorite John Lennon solo album. Until very recently, I would have probably said that this was the best solo album that any Beatle put out. That has since been overtaken by All Things Must Pass by George Harrison, which which doesn't count as a debut because he did do a couple of albums like I mean, I know they were more experimental and one was a soundtrack, but they were albums in George Harrison's name. So I didn't think of All Things Must Pass for this particular show, but yeah, I still love the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album to death. I, you know, I probably like Paul and George better than John overall as solo artists, but this album, just one of the greatest solo albums the Beatles ever did. So that's my second choice.
Excellent choice.
Nice.
All right, Todd, your third and final choice.
Okay, well, I hope I get invited back after picking this next band. Um, I'm going to talk about a Canadian band that I promise you none of you are going to talk about and nobody talks about ever online. There's a lot of backlash with this band because they had a very popular, most people would consider overplayed #1 single in the US in the 90s. But I'm going to talk about the debut album by Bare Naked Ladies called Gordon. And oh, I see a thumbs up. Thank you, John. I'm so glad. I love this band. And what a lot of people don't know about this band is that they are really good players. And as time has gone on, they have relied less on their chops and a little bit more on songcraft. But my goodness, this album, Gordon, I've never heard a band more on fire than on this album. They released a demo tape. They started out busking in the streets of Toronto, and they released a demo tape that was called the Yellow Tape, and it went platinum in Canada. And they won a contest that was hosted by a radio station, and they entered the Yellow Tape in, and it won. And with the money, they hired this guy who was a Canadian producer of some notoriety. His name was Michael Philip Wojawoda. And they recorded this album, Gordon, at Le Studio in north of Montreal, where Rush recorded and Saga and a bunch of other bands later on. And this album, I wouldn't call it a perfect album because it's about an hour long because it's 1992 and everybody was making albums longer than they needed to be. It's 15 songs. I think at 12 songs it would have been a stronger record. But some of these songs are so creative and the drummer Tyler Stewart is such a great drummer and the bass player almost exclusively played a double bass, a stand-up bass. And so you get this really unique rhythm section going. And there are some songs that got airplay, not in the States, but there's a song called Brian Wilson on here that some people might know, and another song called Be My Yoko Ono. But the song that I wanted to talk about the most is one that's called Grade 9. And it's basically them talking about what it was like to be in grade 9. And there's some really great lyrics in here. They say, I went out for the football team to prove that I'm a man. I guess I shouldn't have told him that I liked Duran Duran. And I got into the classroom and my knowledge was gone. I guess I should have studied instead of watching Wrath of Khan. And so what's this third one I wanted to share? I went to the high school dance. Dad said I had to be home by 11. Oh man, I'm going to miss Stairway to Heaven. But the best part of this song is that the bridge is them playing the drum solo part of Rush's YYZ. And it's so funny, so creative. The first time I heard it, which was, probably 4 or 5 years after it came out, I just fell on the floor with laughter. Another great song on this album is called Box Set, and it basically is a little essay about box sets and compilations and the opinion that a lot of people have that it's just a way to separate you from your money. And it's just a spot on parody of repackaging and re-releasing music, and just hilarious. They've got other good albums. They've got one of the things that's great about Bare Naked Ladies is that they've got four singers in the band and two main lead singers who kind of swap back and forth. And the guy with the best voice, the guy with the weirdest voice and the best voice was a guy named Stephen Page. And he left the band after about 6 albums. And he makes albums that are also spectacular. But they've made a lot of good records. This is the one right here that has the big single 1 week, also a good record. They've gone back to the original producer, uh, 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 Michael Philip Wojwoda, a couple of times, and usually the ones that he produces are a little bit closer to their roots. But a great band, an underrated band. They're still going. The albums, the last 4 or 5 albums have not been great, but they've still been good. They're still worth a listen. But man, this one right here, if you've never heard this, I mean, you can sort of tell by looking at it how wacky it is. It's a lot of fun. So Gordon by Bare Naked Ladies is my number 3.
Yeah, no, good one. I probably, apart from the song 1 week, I knew them from making an appearance or two on the Weird Al show.
Yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
So, yeah, no, I think they're an underrated band. So, no, I'm glad you mentioned them. Really am.
Yeah, I started listening to them in '96, and this when their third album came out, Born on a Pirate Ship, because what was that song that was on uh, MTV? Let me see, which one was
The
it?
old
Would it have
apartment.
been? Yeah, it would have been The Old Apartment. Uh, that was that was when I discovered him, and when I went back to Gordon, I was just absolutely blown away. But yeah, great band.
No, wonderful. Thanks for
Hey,
that.
Todd, is If I Had $1 Million on the debut?
Yes, that's on Gordon too.
Oh,
One of
okay.
my favorite songs of all time.
That's a great song. I love that song.
Yeah.
We played them all. Some of my coworkers played them a lot, so I know that all those '90s albums from working in the record store.
Yeah, they used to have this thing before 1 week. They had kind of a cult following. And in the song "If I Had $1 Million," there's a line that says, "If I had $1 million, we wouldn't have to eat Kraft dinner. Of course we would. We'd just eat more." And people used to bring boxes of macaroni and cheese, and when they said that line, they would just throw uncooked elbow macaroni to the point where when I finally saw them, I think it was 1997, they had signs out that said, uncooked macaroni hurts. Please don't throw Kraft dinner. I always thought that was pretty funny.
Wow, that's great. All right, Davey, what is your third and final choice?
Okay, my last choice is from the '90s, just like Todd. I'm staying in California, so I'm staying on the West Coast of America. This is a three-piece, some might call them a power trio from California, in the alt rock realm, a bit of power pop, but they always had some guitar heft that separated them from the power pop bands of the 90s. They've been around since 92. They took a 4-year break, late 90s, early 2000s. If you haven't heard their stuff, I urge you to go to Spotify or YouTube, check them out. The band, the three-piece, is Dada, D-A-D-A. They were on IRS Records, and their debut album, Puzzle, is phenomenal. There's not a bad track on it. Some of you might remember the big single, Disneyland, that was on college radio, alt rock radio. It hit number 102 on the Billboard charts, number 27 on the US rock chart, and number 5 on the alt rock chart in Billboard magazine. And they spelled it D-I-Z-Z, new word knee, K-N-E-E, third word land, because they couldn't spell it or else they'd get sued if they spelled it like Disneyland, like the Disney Channel. So it's Disneyland, and it's a great song. You might remember that. I saw some recognition amongst the panelists here.
It's going through my head right now.
It's so darn catchy.
Yeah,
and
that's a good record. It's a real record. Yeah.
If they were on a different label than IRS, I always thought they could have been bigger. If they were on Warner Brothers, they could have gotten that bigger label push, because there are great tracks on this record. Dorina, the opening track, Mary Sunshine Rain, the guitar riff in that song is great. The guitar player, and this band, sort of like Bare Naked Ladies, they have two main singers, and they both sing really the song. Sometimes they alternate lines, stanzas, parts. Michael Gurley is an underrated guitar player, and unfortunately, he's got, oh geez, the name of the disease just flew out of my head. When you have trouble not arthritis, he's got a disease that sometimes it's very hard for him to play. So he has to ice down his hands during shows, after shows, and these guys play epic shows. Unfortunately, I've never seen them live. So Michael Gurley is a great guitar player. Joey Callio on bass guitar and vocals, and the drummer who could also sing, Phil Levitt. So all the guys sing, and they got great songs on this record. They actually released 5 singles to alt rock radio. And Dog reached number 71 in the UK. That's a really good song with it. They have like twists on the lyrics, and they've made 4, maybe 5 records if you consider they put out a 5th record in 2004 that was unreleased songs from their 4th album. Dim reached number 24 on the US alt rock charts, number 92 in the UK. Here Today, Gone Tomorrow was a single, which is a story song. These guys have great story songs. And Dorina, the first track, which I love, has some great guitar work, was the last single. They never became as big as they should have. They're still around. They play a lot of shows on the West Coast, and I regret never seeing them live. So check out the band Dada. And their other albums have great songs too. On American Highway Flower from 94, El Subliminoso from 96, and the self-titled album Dada from 1998. Highly recommended if you like power pop with a bit of edge and some guitar heft, which is what makes the band for me, plus the great vocals.
Yeah.
So Dada is my third choice.
No, good choice. You know, IRS is one of those labels, like they never seem to be able to push their bands hard enough. But at the same time, they're one of those labels where I will listen to a band purely because they're on IRS, because there's just so many good bands that were on IRS records, you know. So
Yeah,
if I
when they
see
first started, we would just buy anything that was on IRS.
yeah,
So yeah,
It was a
The
cool label.
Alarm.
It was cool labels.
yeah.
The Alarm on
Yep.
IRS.
Mhm.
Wasn't it Miles Copeland?
Yes.
Yes.
Stewart's
Yeah.
brother.
Yeah. And the 90s were not a good time for them. They had already lost REM, and they didn't have the financial backing that they were used to. So
yeah.
not a good time for them.
I first became aware of IRS records because of Wall of Voodoo. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. No, great choice, Davey.
Thanks.
John, what is your third and final choice?
Okay, thank you. My choice is a post-punk band that is from LA. A lot of people think that well, all the post punk came out of Europe, but there are a lot of post punk bands for the United States as well. And it's the Dream Syndicate and their debut album, The Days of Wine and Roses. Now, back when this came out, they were calling this band the Velvet Underground of the 1980s. In the fact that you had a woman in the band that could sing, just like you had Nico on the first Velvet Underground album, and they had Maureen Tucker, who was the drummer, Velvet Underground, also sang. Here we had Kendra Smith, who was the bass player and also sang too, but then she left after this album. But this album is just a knockout from top to bottom. And you got songs that are really haunting on here, like When You Smile, and That's What You Always Say. And then you got stuff that's more upbeat, like Definitely Clean. Halloween is a fantastic song. It's got this great groove that really brings you in. It's an awesome track. And the guitars in this band are excellent. Steve Wynn was their main guitar player, along with Steve Wynn was their main songwriter, along with Carl Prokoda. They both played guitar, and they have these great guitar battles on some of these songs, particularly the last song, the title track. And then Too Little Too Late was Kendra's song, which was a lot more mellow and atmospheric and, a little bit psychedelic, you could say. But this is a fantastic album. And ironically, the next album, which would be called The Medicine Show, that people would call them the Neil Young and Crazy Horse from the 80s, because that time they turned the guitars up louder. And then they made two more albums in the 80s. They broke up for 27 years. Steve Wynn kept making solo albums. Well, they didn't make another album for 27 years. They got back together, but they took forever to make an album. And then they put out How Did I Find Myself Here? And it was like they didn't lose a beat. All the albums they've made four albums since 2016, are excellent. And they're all a little bit different too, just like the first four albums were in the 80s. So for a post-punk band, the Dream Syndicate, they were killer. And to me, this is a perfect album. Excellent. So my number three is Days of Wine and Roses by the Dream Syndicate.
Yeah, no, really good choice. Yeah, love
Yeah,
that
when I,
album.
I went to college in Athens, Georgia, and they were real popular in Athens. I think I may be wrong about this, but I think the guys in REM were fans, and they
Mm-hmm.
would play Athens quite a bit, and they were
Yes.
pretty popular there.
And I
Yeah,
saw them
didn't
live in 2017, right when they got back together, and they didn't. It was the only time I didn't see them in the 80s. But wow, the guitar duels that they had on stage, along with the song craftsmanship, was excellent. They put on a fantastic show.
did
Yeah,
they open
no.
for REM back in the day?
I think
I
they
think
did.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, what is your third and final choice for tonight?
Okay. Well, I'm also going to go to the 90s. This is 1990, around 1995 or so. I remember reading a review of an album, and it just piqued my interest. And I was living in Chicago at the time, and I literally like lived down the street from this huge Tower Records. Remember those huge? I used to love those Tower Records, and you could go and you could put headphones on, and you could listen to stuff. They'd have all these albums out there, and I used to go there all the time. It's just after work or whatever. I'm going to Tower again, because there's this huge place, and it's like a kid in a candy store. I'm sure you guys can relate. It's like it's like, what am I going to buy today?
Yeah, if
And
you like cassettes, every kind of blank cassette brand that you could think of.
the Maxell XL90s,
That's
or
where
yeah,
all my money went, was blank tapes from Tower.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
Sorry, Tom.
TDK, TD. Yeah, remember when
Yeah.
you used to get I'm getting off track, but you'd get those huge things of cassettes. You'd be so excited to fill them up.
Yeah. They'd come with a
Yeah.
free case or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so I read a review of this band and it got me excited. I went and they just seemed cool to me and I was like, I don't know, I'm gonna check it out. They're from England and they're a three-piece, apparently like a power trio, and they ended up being called sort of like Britpop, but really they're kind of forgotten, and that's Supergrass. I should Coco, and this is kind of like I remember picking this up, and you look at the picture of them, and they look like, I think they were like 19 or something, like 20. I mean, they're so young on this record, and there's so much energy just popping off this album, and they had a big hit with the song All Right. which was huge in England. I mean, they were a bigger band in England than they were in the United States. But I just thought this album was great. It kind of reminded me of like almost like a punky version of like David Bowie or something, like almost like Ziggy Stardust era Bowie or something like that, with like but it like in a power trio version. And because there were songs, Caught by the Fuzz is a great song. Man Size Rooster, all right. Lenny, Strange Ones. It never ends. And I will say that I really like In It for the Money, which was the next album. It's kind of like Bicycle Legs was saying about Gang of Four with Entertainment and Solid Gold. It's like they're both very good, but I think I'm going to give the nod to I Should Coco because this album just from start to finish is just nonstop. Love it.
Yeah. No, it's a really
Yeah.
good album. I remember All Right being, I don't know if it was a chart hit here, but it was certainly a radio hit. Got played on the radio and on the TV clip shows all the time. And my little sister, she's huge Supergrass fan, so love that for a choice.
Yep.
All right. My final choice is going to be again somebody who used to be in a band who left and started a solo career starting at the very beginning of the 80s. The band he was in was not very successful, but then after he left would get another lead singer and become very successful. Um, and then this man would go on and do a solo career, which would have varying degrees of success and all that sort of thing. The man I am talking about is John Fox. The album is Metamatic. Of course, he was the original lead singer of Ultravox, and they would go on to have much, much more success with Midge Ure as lead singer. But this album, wow. I mean, this is at the very beginnings of British synth pop before it got really commercial and that sort of thing. This is still a very experimental album. It's stark and it's bleak sounding. It's kind of futuristic and not futuristic at the same time. And at the same, you've got, and John Fox has these just wonderful, you know, deliberately passionless vocals. He's trying to be very emotionless and almost sort of like an automaton on a lot of these songs. Um, Going back to like, I think on the very first Ultravox album, he did a song called I Want to Be a Machine. And that's kind of the vibe he's going for on this record. Um, it's got a couple of songs that he'd written for Ultravox that didn't end up getting used by them. They played them on tour just before he left the band. Songs like He's a Liquid. Um, but you've also got wonderful songs like Plaza, Metal Beat, A New Kind of Man. There is one song on here called Underpass, and he sings it with like an American style pronunciation. So he says underpass. And to me, I always thought he was singing underpants. But yeah, Touch and Go is a great song. But this is a really, really, it's a minimalist album. There's not a lot of instrumentation. It's just synthesizer and very basic drum machine. Um, and John Fox plays, most of the synthesizers. He programs the rhythm machines. John Barker plays a little bit of additional synthesizer, and there's a little additional bass from a guy called Jake Durant. So after this, John Fox would make some really good albums. The album that came after this was called The Garden and is a really, really good album too. But it's definitely more going back to what he was doing with Ultravox. He's bringing back live drums, he's bringing back guitars and that sort of thing. Whereas this album, in 1980, there was nothing else that sounded like it. It really sounded like the future today. So that's my third and final choice for today is John Fox's Metamatic.
Excellent.
I
Now,
gotta check that
before
out.
we
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, neither am I.
Same
Before we
here.
get into um, honorable mentions, I think there's a couple of albums here, a couple of real low-hanging fruit that we haven't talked about that I think that our viewers are going to expect us to mention. So I'll mention those off the bat, and this is one of them here, Asia's debut album. I
Yeah.
think 95% of people agree that this is the best Asia album.
I didn't pick it because I like Alpha better, but
Well, there
yes,
you go.
Wow.
You're
There you go.
definitely in a minority there, though,
I
Todd, I
definitely,
think.
I'm a party of one.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then the other one I think we absolutely have to talk about is this one right here,
of
Boston's
course. Yeah,
debut.
yeah.
I mean, again, I think I can't imagine that there are very many people in the world who would argue that Don't Look Back or Third Stage or some of those later albums are a better record than this one.
Not even me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is,
That-
I
That's
mean,
saying a lot. Not saying
I
it.
think most of us will agree too. This is an utterly phenomenal album.
Oh
Absolutely.
God, yeah. Yes.
So, yeah. All right. So if we can just sort of quick fire off any honorable mentions that you might have, Todd, starting with you.
Well, the first thing that I thought of, and I almost put this in, but I consider this to be a band that I have kind of a difficult history with because they're so complex. But King Crimson and the Court of the Crimson King, that's my favorite King Crimson album.
Hmm.
And, King Crimson is a challenge to get into, and for a lot of people, for myself included. And do I think King Crimson is an awesome band that has some spectacular moments? Absolutely. But I think In the Court of the Kings and King is the most well-rounded record from start to finish, in my opinion. Everything else on my list has a question mark by it. The Cars, yes, you could argue that the debut was the best. I like Candio better, but I wouldn't tell anybody they were wrong if they said that the debut was best. I have Chicago because my personal favorite is Chicago Transit Authority, but others may disagree. Others may pick the next album, and they would be also correct. Phil Collins, a lot of people would say that Face Value was the best. I like, but seriously the best. But again, if you say Face Value is the best, I would just say yeah. Um, The Doors, I think the Doors' first album, bookended by Light My Fire and The End. I don't think it gets much better than that. Not that they didn't make good albums later. And then I had Robert Plant, but again, Party of One, Pictures at 11 is my favorite. Most people's favorite is The Principle of Moments. So that's why all of those got cut.
Yeah, this was a question mark for me
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
So there you go.
yeah. It's just too
But
hard to commit to that for me.
I'll very quickly say, Todd, firstly, In the Court of the Crimson King is not my favorite King Crimson album. That's Red. But it is
That's
one
my
of the
second
most
favorite.
it is one of the most astonishing debut albums of all time.
Absolutely.
Just how incredibly
yeah.
fully formed this band was
Yeah.
when they made that debut album. I will also quickly say that as much as I like Chicago Transit Authority, my personal favorite Chicago album is Chicago 5. But yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Mhm.
so there you go. All right, Davey, what honorable mentions do you have? Not going to rattle off all 29 of them, are you?
No, I'm not going to. Just a few. But I did have a big list that was whittled down. I will go with the power trio from Louisiana who got big on Long Island, New York. Zebra, their debut album is my favorite. Another artist who used to be in the band Marillion, Fish, or Fesh, as they say in Scotland. His debut solo album, Vigil in a Wilderness of Mirrors, is my favorite from his catalog.
Yeah.
So that's an honorable mention. And then I'm going to my third and last one is one of my favorite female singer-songwriters from 1991, 1992, depending which country you're in. Tori Amos's debut, Little Earthquakes, is my favorite by
Yeah.
her, although Under the Pink is really, really close. Big
No,
Tori fan for her like first 8 albums or so.
yeah. No, those are good choices, Davey. Love it.
And I
Okay,
had bad,
John. Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead, Davey. Yep.
John, just to let John know, I had Bad Company on my larger list.
Okay,
That
cool.
was a good choice.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
All right, John, do you have any honorable mentions for
I
us?
do. This artist is more known for his political views these days, but I'll tell you what, the first Ted Nugent self-titled album kicks ass. I've loved it ever since I was a kid, and I will love it till I die. When I need to hear some great hard rock and some fantastic guitar playing, I go straight to this one. The first three albums are fantastic, but in my opinion, you can't beat the debut. Okay, so for me, this was the best thing Ronnie James Dio ever did. Whether you look at Elf, whether you look at Black Sabbath, Rainbow, I thought his self-titled Holy Diver. I'm not self-titled, but his debut Holy Diver with his own band. I think this album is a knockout from top to bottom. Excellent album. Another band I've talked about on my channel, the Music Nut program, Spin Doctors, Pocket Full of Kryptonite. I do know they put out a live EP before this, but I don't count like EPs. And that was
No.
live. This is their first studio album. This is a knockout. This is a near nonstop party. And here's one that's maybe a lot of people picked the second album, but Oasis definitely maybe. I thought this album was a killer from top to bottom. And the second album, What's the Story More and Glory, is very good too. It adds the hit singles, but this I think is just a stronger album. This is the one that hit me harder. So there you go.
No, good choices. Love
Thank you.
it. Okay, Tom, have you got any honorable mentions for us?
Okay, it's time for the lightning round. Pretenders,
Yeah,
Pretenders.
Uh,
No, I don't know. I don't think they really topped this album, in my opinion.
Yeah.
no.
The second album was quite good, and Learning to Crawl I liked a lot, but after that,
They have a
just
lot of good songs, but
yes,
Mm.
exactly.
that's their good album. Yeah.
This is from
The
start to
first
finish, is
three.
killer. Yeah, this is just killer. Um, Get the Knack. This is I love this album. I bought it when it came out, and this is just like power pop perfection, and I don't think they ever topped it. Um, the Romantics, this
Oh,
debut,
yeah.
this is really good album. I mean, people forget that, like, First in Line, Tell It to Carrie, I mean, just so many great songs on this. This is and they never topped it. Not sure that Pete Townsend ever did better than his debut, and I love this album to death. There's some great other stuff, but I love this one. Uh, this could be a hot take. Last one, well, is Dire Straits. I love this album. I think this is my favorite Dire Straits record. I don't know. I like it.
You could make a
Davey's like
pretty strong argument for that, I think.
Davey's
Yeah.
like no,
Yeah.
and then
No, I'm with Davey. My personal favorite Dire Straits album is Love Over Gold, but
Mine too,
um
but I could see somebody making that argument, and I
yeah,
wouldn't really be able to
yeah,
disagree.
absolutely. And
Making
you
movies.
yeah,
oh,
making
that's true.
movies
Making
Movies
is
is
movies
my
is very
making
good. Yeah.
movies is my close second, Davey. But Tom, you're going to have to argue that Pete Townsend one with Martin Popov because I know he loves all the best cowboys have Chinese eyes.
Same
Yes.
here. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm not I'm rarely with Martin, but I am on that.
Well, again, on these are like I think, was it Todd saying there were question marks? Like some of
Yeah.
these are like I
Yeah.
think so. I'm not positive. Like you said, a Chinese eyes is very strong. I agree.
I
Last
thought about
one.
picking. Oh, one more. Good. Go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say I thought about picking Holy Diver, but there are later Dio albums that I'm not familiar with at all, so I didn't feel comfortable picking it, but I wanted to.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, last one, and that is it? This might also be a hot take for a lot of people, but Hendrix, are you
Mm.
experienced? I mean, did he? Electric Ladyland is great, but it's kind of all over the place. This one's
I,
like just it's, you know what I mean? I don't know.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah, so
Mm.
do I.
I actually love Axis Boldest, love the best, but I go through phases with him. Like
Hmm.
Yeah.
those first three have all been my favorite at one point or another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's
Yeah.
nitpicking. It's nitpicking.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'll just quickly mention a few. This one I almost put in my three. I ended up swapping it out for the John Fox album, but Men Without Hats, Rhythm of Youth, great album. And I mean, the couple that came after this are really, really good too, but I really don't think they ever topped this one. I did have the Cars there. because I love this record to death. Although I'm listening to the cars in the car at the moment, I'll tell you what, Todd, and I know you'll appreciate this. Panorama really going up in my estimations at
Yeah,
the moment.
yeah,
Love Panorama.
Um, and this is an album that Peter Kerr and I have done a show on my channel. So shameless plug, please go and look at this. I will leave a link in the description. But Hoodoo Gurus, Stone Age Romeos.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love Hoodoo Gurus. I think they've never done a bad album.
No.
All their albums are really, really good. But this is the best, and it will always be the best. So yeah. And one that I forgot to pull out and I'm kicking myself about, and I will leave a link in the description for a show I've done on this album too, and that is Marquee Moon by Television.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So
It did have
Got
3
that.
albums.
yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Reunion album in the early 90s, 91,
Yes,
I think.
exactly.
Oh,
So
totally forgot Marquee Moon. That's a great one.
Could I
yeah.
just do a fast plug for Tom's channel?
Well, we're going to do plugs for everybody's channels in a minute. So
Well, just really fast on Tom's
yeah.
channel. You just mentioned the Cars debut album, and Tom and I are doing a deep dive on every Cars album on Curless Mania. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry.
Yep,
Are you
no,
gonna
that's fair
rank
enough.
them, or are
Pardon?
you gonna rank them, Davey, or are you gonna just
That we
do a?
haven't discussed. We just did the
Okay.
first album so far
Oh, you're doing separate deep dives. Okay.
Yeah.
on each
Cool.
album. Yes.
Excellent.
Mhm.
All right. Well, there you have it, everyone. Those are our picks for artists that never topped their debut album. Please let us know in the comments what ones you agree with, what ones you disagree with, and what examples do you have of artists that never topped their debut album that we didn't mention, because we'd love to see those as well. Please do go and subscribe if you haven't already to Cretan Classics, to the Music Nut program, and to Curless Mania. I will leave links all in the description for all of those channels. Thank you, Todd Evans, Davey Cretan, John the Music Nut, and Tom Curless. Pleasure to have you all on the channel again. We will have to do this again soon. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see any of my other panel shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, and I've done a couple on Curless Mania already, and I've got one coming up on Cretan Classics, then I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Bye bye.